But even me going to school was more like, that cannot be true because in my entire life, I had never had 2 meals a day. So in my head, I thought, there's no such as like only in heaven can you have 3 meals. That was how I was convinced my brain. But because I somehow he'd given me that trust, I said, you know what? I'm gonna go and check it out. That I didn't believe in him. It was more of I will believe in you for me to go check that out. So that's how I got to check it out. But also too, like it took me maybe almost 2 years to believe that that food will not stop because I think as foster parents we get to learn like it's not a 3 month episode. It's not like a 6 month episode. Each kid has ways on how they overcome that. For me, it took me almost 2 years to believe that that food will not stop.
Welcome to Book Therapy. I'm your host, Kim Patton. There's no way to count how many books are floating around in this world. Some are decent, some are truly terrible, and some are great. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into one great book. Together, we will discover gems of truth and encouragement to help you as a foster and adoptive family raise kids from hard places. You're ready, I'm ready, let's get this party started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Book Therapy. I am so glad you are here because today's guest is amazing. I have been looking forward to this for months. We recorded this a while ago, and I'm finally getting it in the queue, ready for you. We'll start with part 1 today, and then next time you'll get part 2, finishing out the interview. There is so much packed in these 2 episodes, so I hope you enjoy. Let's dive into the book. Today we are talking about Now I Am Known by Peter Mutabazi, and he is in Charlotte, North Carolina, close by to me. I wish I could do this in person, but we are online together, so welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Truly a joy.
Peter is an entrepreneur, an adoptive dad of 3, a foster dad of 3 currently, and he is the founder of Now I Am Known. He's known online as the Foster Dad Flipper. So I watched a little news clip of them doing, kind of focusing on remodeling bedrooms for foster kiddos. So if you go on his Instagram or go online, you'll see that he's just, he's a real interesting guy, Peter. I don't know. If I had to describe you to someone, I'd be like, I love the video of your tall son saying, here's my short dad. And you just see him kind of bouncing around like a little ball of energy. So I love your videos because you're super fun. And also, if you read your books, you have lived 50 lives in your one life. First, we're going to talk about Now I Am Known, and then we'll go on to your second book, Love Does Not Conquer All. So tell my listeners a little bit about you and what you've been doing with your kiddos lately.
Right, absolutely. Well, my name is Peter Mutabazi, and I'm originally from Uganda, but I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been a foster dad for almost 10 years. I've had 47 children. So all this gray hair is totally from my kids, not from me, from my kids. And that's my passion, like truly advocating for kids in foster care and kids all over the world, because I was that kid, grew up poor in Uganda. And it's hard to explain what poverty means to an American, but in my world, it was like, think of it as like you have no meal to feed your kids and you don't tell them to dream because if you're a mom and you cannot feed your kids, like how do you tell them to dream? Well, I'm going to send you to bed, but would you be a teacher next year or in future? No. And that was my life. Became a street kid because I ran away from my abusive dad. And through the kindness of a stranger, changed my life. And that's how I got to be a foster parent. And that's what I love to do. Yes, my house is full, bouncy, loud, commotion, name it all. Today I was trying to sweep and I couldn't figure out whose shoes am I holding and whose toy, why are the toys in the pantry? That is my everyday life.
So, your first book, Now I Am Known, really dives into your childhood. And I have read hundreds of memoirs, and yours really stuck out to me. I got to the end and I thought, this is probably one of my top 10. It struck a chord with me because of your honesty and just the experiences that you lived in Uganda. Honestly, it was shocking. And I read online, you were talking about being in the sewer and how someone tried to drown you. And so that gave you a fear of water and
Right.
swimming. and you didn't want that to prevent you from having fun with your kiddos. And so that kind of launched a whole part of your story. And that just connects to this first book, Now I Am Known. So you talk about your mother, which is a beautiful story because it started out with her having a hard time with you being on the street and her getting shunned in the community because of your reputation of being a street kid in the city. But then it kind of came full circle when you were able to come back to your hometown and kind of show to her what you've done with the time that you had to yourself when you were gone. And through the kindness of strangers and the generosity of others, you were able to get an education. So, with this first book, we're going to talk about number one, living in survival mode. When you were living on the streets of Kampala, you talk about losing faith in humanity, not being able to trust anyone. There was a woman who started giving you fruit, and you thought, you know what, maybe I can trust her. And then she started asking for sexual favors in return, and you realize, nope. Once again, I'm right. There's no one that can be trusted. Talk to me about fighting out of self-preservation, living on the streets, and how you had to fight every day just to find food, and you did not have any faith in humanity.
Right, absolutely. And that began with my father. I think my father, as kids we would would go to bed hungry, and my mom would go to him and say, "Hey, the kids haven't eaten. Would you provide for them?" And she'd get beatings for that. And as a kid, I could not understand just how my mother could get abused because of my needs. So that's really where I began to lose trust because my father was the first person to kind of take it away. So slowly, once I became a street kid, I kind of came with that, like, well, if my own father could not protect me, no one else can. And as a street kid, you had to learn to survive on an hourly basis because every hour things would change. So you had to learn constantly. The person you met an hour ago is different from the next person you're gonna meet. And so you were meeting different people at all times, different times, and each personality came out with something. And as a street kid, I think at first because I didn't know what kindness was, and I began to see people were kind on the streets. And I began to say, wait a minute, people can be kind than what my father was. And then I realized, like, wait a minute, that kindness had a price behind it. So I was like, forget it. And I think that really removed every ounce of humanity for me. But in some way, I think I was setting my expectations so low that just that would help me survive because hoping and looking for good humanity in a sense was lying to myself. So for me, I just said, you know what? In order not to lie to myself, I'm gonna set my expectations so low that everyone, either they are good or they are bad, they will always be bad. And that was truly my survival of living, not trusting, but also knowing that there wasn't really anything good in people. But that was rooted or taken away by my own father on how he treated me. The being on the streets, is what people did every day. And I think I had to remove myself from that human sense of people can be nice, people can be kind, that I was lying to myself if I, in any way, shape, form, began to believe that way.
How long were you on the streets? I think you were 16 when you left. So what was that time period?
5 years. So became a street kid at the age of 10. So until the end of my 15th year that this stranger came into my life. So I had to live that for a long time on the streets of Kampala, that somehow had taken any human sense of people away because I had never seen anyone kind at all.
So when you met James and he provided you this safe place, you talk in the book about how it was hard to accept his love and you were still in survival mode. Um, we see this a lot in our kiddos. You understand where they're coming from. And I love how, as I'm reading the book, I know who you are now, and yet you're telling the story of who you were and how you were raised. And you talk about coming full circle, but at the same time, you say, even though I understood why they feel the way they feel, I couldn't. It still took a while to put words to the trauma and really unpack what you went through without being triggered and realizing, okay, yeah, I was that kid, but now I'm being triggered. And so, how do I process it through in my own heart, in my own brain, in my own mind and body, while this kid is also kind of being triggered and going through survival mode, like living in survival mode, like you did? So, talk to me about James and how long it took you to shift from being in survival mode to learning to trust and accept his love. Um, One tangible story that I remember is when you were at the school and they were providing the food 3 times a day, and yet you still didn't feel comfortable receiving that food 3 times a day, like you didn't know it was going to be there the next day. How long did it take for your brain and your body to process through moving out of survival mode?
Whoa, well, that took for a long time. So remember, so he fed me for 1 year and a half before he could offer for me school. So he had to gain and earn my trust first. I don't think he intentionally did so, but taking that long helped me to believe. When he said, when you go to school, there'll be 3 meals, I believed it in some way because he demonstrated that for 1 year and a half, you know? But even me going to school was more like, that cannot be true because in my entire life, I had never had 2 meals a day. So in my head, I thought, there's no such as like only in heaven can you have 3 meals. That was how I was convinced my brain. But because I somehow he'd given me that trust, I said, you know what? I'm gonna go and check it out. That I didn't believe in him. It was more of I will believe in you for me to go check that out. So that's how I got to check it out. But also too, like it took me maybe almost 2 years to believe that that food will not stop because I think as foster parents we get to learn like it's not a 3 month episode. It's not like a 6 month episode. Each kid has ways on how they overcome that. For me, it took me almost 2 years to believe that that food would not stop. But also, once I knew it would keep coming, I had to work for it to keep coming in summer. So there were two parts. Like I had put on school, go to class, not beat up anyone, not steal anything. If I stop these three things, four things, that food will not stop. And now I realized, like, wait a minute, my condition in working to get that wasn't really true. That food was coming despite of my behavior. Food was coming despite of all that. But it took years for me to get there. And it wasn't the food, it was the words. The words they used that began to say, if you believe in me and you think I'm special, then I'm special to have that food. Because for me, those are the words that I didn't understand. Like, you're special, you're a gift to us, you matter. I was like, wait, what does that mean? And once I understood those, I think they really build a human side of me to say, you know what? Now that I'm special, maybe I deserve that food. Now that I belong, that maybe I deserve that food. So I had to believe in myself first in order to truly build up to say that food would not go away. So it took me years, one at a time, but somehow I got there. But it's not at one time, it's not at 6 months, it's like every child is different. And it takes longer than sometimes for us parents we wish we could, in a way, for our children.
Your parents have obviously made a huge impact in your life because that's how you started your story. You wanted to tell the story about your dad, you wanted to tell the story about your mom. You are who you are today because of your parents, because of your siblings, and the life that you lived in Uganda. Talk to me about your mom and your dad and how you were able to not only get out of being a street kid and get some education, but you knew your roots. You knew your family and your village and your friends were still living in the place where you grew up, and your mom was still there. And what was it like to come back to show her your shoes? Talk to me about the shoes because that is such a visual, is that the people in your village did not have shoes and you didn't even own shoes until you were a teenager. So talk to me about shoes, talk to me about your parents and what it was like to come back after receiving education to your village.
Right. So for me, because I loved my mom and I wanted to give pride back to my mother. They say a mom's pride is how she raises her children as an African. So for me, I wanted to give her that pride back that when she walks to the village, she says, my son is well, my son is receiving education and my son is well. So it's something that I really wanted to give. But also to be honest, I think I wanted to give my dad the middle finger. It was a way of telling my father, you wish the worst for me, but hey, let me show you how everything you say that I'll never amount to anything, everything you say that I'm stupid, that that wasn't really true. So it was like two things I was trying to do: give my mom pride, but also give my dad a middle finger. To be honest, you know, it was a way to kind of really show. But also, I'm the oldest of five, so I wanted to show my siblings, like, hey, by the way, don't give up. My father, you might be still living with my father. He might still calling you every name you could think of and abusing you. But actually, if you believe in yourself, something is good is going to happen. And I wanted to show that example that something good was happening in my life so my little brothers and sisters can believe. So that was the reason to go back home, was really those three things. Give my mom pride was number one, and then tell my dad, like, you wish the worst for me, but actually that's not what turned out. And give hope to my siblings as well.
Later in the book, and I believe in your second book, you kind of talked about this more. And thankfully, I read the books back to back. So I'm able to, it just wove together. It was one big story. And your story is heart-wrenching, it's heartbreaking, but I'm glad you're telling it because there's probably more families like yours, and the fact that you're telling your story gives them a voice as well. So when you go back to your dad and you talk about forgiveness and you talk about living in freedom, we'll talk about our kids later and foster kids in general. But for you personally, as you've aged and as you've grown up and become a father yourself, how has God used the story of you and your dad to strengthen your relationship with your kids and also your relationship with God?
Right, absolutely. So, my foster parents, so when they took me in, every time I wanted to give up, every time I just like, I'm done. I can't do this, or I was angry, or I was just about to give up on anything. He used the life of Joseph. For some reason, he found the life, the story of Joseph really somehow impactful in my life. He will always say, Peter, what did Joseph do when he was sold by his own brothers? It's like, he used every aspect he had to do better for himself. And he said, what did he say to his brothers once they found him? He said, for what they meant for evil, God used it for good to save a life. Somehow that really got to my brain. Like, wait a minute, this guy was sold by his brothers, but he always chose to do good no matter what. And then now he's looking back and says, yes, you meant it for evil, but actually God used it to save a life for me and those around me. And for me, that helped me really, really so much to say, wait a minute, I can choose to take my past. I can choose to really look at my abuse and use it as a foundation to do better for me and myself and for the future. And that really, really helped me to shift my attitude. And my mom also would always say, every time my dad would beat us up and he would say, son, look this way. 10% happened to you, but 90% is your attitude. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, he beat you for 5 minutes, but he's gone, but you're mad the whole day. But that being mad, that is your choice. I was like, huh. And that really helped me to like, wait a minute, I have control and power to change the situation, not to drag it, not to look at it and say, oh, why dare him do that? But to say, you know what? I'm going to look back and I'm going to use it and I do better for myself in some way. And that really changed me. The other part is my father, I think he wished the worst for me, that I didn't want that to dictate my future. Like I didn't want my past and my father in a way to decide what my future would be. I was like, hold on, I can actually choose to say no really today, not today, that I'm going to choose to truly see as God has, ordained this and helped me and rescued me and brought people in my life to protect me in some way, rather than look at my back, but rather use it as good. And for me, that's really what helped me understand God. But also too, this man who took me in, I think I struggled with God as a father, but this man demonstrated what a father ought to be like. He was so kind when I wasn't kind. He was so giving when I wasn't giving. And I think that helped me to see God as my father through him in a way that really changed the way I view my situation. And to trust that God really loved me in every shape, form, no matter what happened to me. So for me, those are the few things, the story of Joseph, that really maybe really laid the best foundation, that no matter he was sold by his brothers, but he didn't always have to do bad because he was sold by his brothers. And that helped me just because my father was so abusive towards me, that I can make a choice not to use the same abuse to do that towards others or myself, but rather to embrace it and do better.
That's a hard shift to be abused and then say, but I still have control over the rest of my day. When you're suffering under someone else's tyranny, you don't feel like you have any control at all. But your mom was wise enough to teach you, yeah, this is a really bad situation and it's unfair and it's horribly violent, but you still have control over your life. That's empowering. And maybe that's what she used to get through her life,
Right.
is trying to take back whatever control that she could. Okay, so that was the first book. Now I Am Known. Thank you for listening to another episode of Book Therapy. For all the details about the author, the book, and what we talked about today, please see the show notes. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave us an honest review on Spotify or Apple. This helps get the word out. And even better, if you know of a foster adoptive family and you think this episode will encourage them, go ahead and send them a text, because not only will it brighten their day, but it will give them another resource, another tool as they are doing the hard work of loving and serving vulnerable children. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will see you next time.